I'm going to talk about how to arrange the blocks and the border units for the Haven quilt. Now you can follow the layout that I used for the mock-up when I was designing the quilt before I actually sewed anything together. And that is how I am probably going to do the Forest Lake version. Though I may swap a few things on the border, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But I also want to point out what things have to stay in the place that they are and what things can change. Because on the Painted Desert colorway, I do plan to swap around some of the big blocks in the main part of the quilt. But let's talk about the Forest Lake version first. So let's talk about the blocks that have to stay where they are. The center block. Now I've only put up from the center row and up onto my design wall because I don't have enough room. So we only have one of the center block, so it has to stay. That's the Dutchman's Puzzle. The other block that we have a number of that's unique, and that is the 8 blocks that are the double X. Now, these are the 9.5-inch blocks, so they get framed by sashing and a mini 9 patch. One thing that you can do, because these do have a direction to them, is you can decide which way you want the double X oriented. So right now I have it so that they are pointing upwards on the right side, and on the left also pointing upwards. The rows that are going to be at the bottom, they will be pointing downwards. So that overall, the effect of just that block is that it's moving up this way or down that way at the, no, you can see that, down that way at the bottom. You could, of course, turn those to be kind of shooting outwards. So you have that ability to decide what orientation you want those to go. I do want mine to be going this way, so I'm going to put those back. Now, once you have decided on the orientation for those blocks and you're sure, like everything's laid out, then you can go and start sewing the sashing and the little 9 patch together. And you can just do that as rows. So a sashing sewn to a 9 patch, mini 9 patch, and the double X sewn to a sashing, those two pieces to go together, and that should finish at 12.5 inches. Here are the 2 rows making up the full double X block. I pressed towards the sashing. So those are the only things that really have to stay in their place. All the other things can maneuver. However, keep in mind that because the 8-point star also has the sashing and mini 9 patch, no matter which way you turn it, it will look the same. But to get this effect, because there are only 4 of these blocks with that, if I were to move those and swap those, for instance, with these blocks or even these blocks, I would be breaking up the design that is caused by having the sashing going here. So while these could be moved cautiously, and it will definitely interrupt how things look. It will not be as symmetrical. It will have a more probably rotational look to it. Now, once you have all these sashing and mini 9 patch units together, so these become 12-inch blocks, then you could rotate the whole block and you would get some other effects from that. So that is a possibility as well. Otherwise, we have 4 of the contrary wife, 4 of the cross, 4 of the mosaic, and those are interchangeable to be placed elsewhere. So as I said, for the Forest Lake colorway, I am keeping this layout. So I have sewn the sashing and the mini 9 patches to the 9.5-inch block, so they are now a full 12.5-inch unit, unfinished. Now it's time to talk about the borders. I have not sewn the blocks together at all, other than making them all be 12.5 inches. because this is a pieced border, we have the opportunity to put 12.5 inches of units together and sew that as part of the row. Likewise, we can actually add these top portions of the border to the top row and sew them as a 12.5 inch wide unit. So this becomes 18.5 inches. Now I have all of, well, this is half of the border here upwards. This is halfway across the top. This quilt is square, so then this repeats and continues on. I don't have enough room on my design wall to add the border over on that side, but I think we can concentrate here and figure out if we want to rearrange anything. You have quite a bit of freedom, except for the fact that the corner 9 patches are all the same, and there are only 4 of them, so they fit into the corner, and I think they work pretty well there. Everything else can be rearranged. So let's try a few different things. This is the layout that is in the mock-up when I was designing the quilt, but I think that a few things could be tweaked to make it just a little bit better. Also, I have all of the arrows pointing towards the center, either the top center or the side center, but they don't have to. You can certainly change those flying geese to be pointing in different directions. So let's play around, see what we can come up with. I like that this becomes a chevron because the fabric is the same for the background and then for the goose on this one. So I think I'm going to keep that. Likewise, I can create this chevron as well. Now that's making that corner a little too dark for my liking, so I think I'm going to move this whole chevron over to here. Now, if I do put this block here, which kind of works, the problem is that this splits between 2 blocks because 4 flying geese would be the equivalent of 12.5, and this is half of a thing. So I think I'm just going to slide all this over and we'll put something else back at that end. Let's see how this looks now that I've moved that. That's not too bad. What if I flip it around? That's kind of interesting. But maybe I pull the yellow. Not 100% sure, but I'm going to keep that and move over to here. So I have this. Oh, I think I'll put that there. That kind of gives an elongated piece there. But now I run into that same issue that this would split here. It's not the end of the world because I could just sew this all as one row and then match up. But it will make it a little bit easier because this is so many pieces and so many seams. This has less seams. And so it's easy for this to end up not being quite the same length by a little bit, but probably not by too much. Now that's a little radical, having the 9 patches be all there on the corner, especially since the edge fabric for both 9 patches is the same, but it might work. It might look kind of cool, and it kind of brings that light thing to go into the arrow that is going that way. So then we're back to our yellow ones here, which could make 2 yellow diamonds that way. That's going to be a lot of yellow right here. I'd kind of like that yellow to move that way. So I'm going to move this and go, let's Let's try this way. So remember here, it's going to reflect. So even though that's different for the moment, I think I'm kind of liking that. So I'm going to finish the reflection here and down the side and step back and see how it's looking. All right, there it is at the top. Let's fix here. I like this blue diamond in the center. I think that looks really cool, but I think this is a little too much with the yellow and it needs to be broken up into triangles. I am a little worried that it's a lot of yellow here and this is very light here. So I think I'm going to take this one, move all of these down one, and try the yellow one here. That still works as far as seams are concerned. So let me take a look at that. I like this much better, so I think I'm going to stick with this. Now, even though it's a border, we can piece it as if it's part of a row. So let's just look at this row here. If I piece these three pieces together, so we have a 6.5 inch square and 2 flying geese, all sewn together, this will be the same height, 12.5 inches, as this block. And so I can just sew it as part of the row. And the same configuration would be at the opposite end of this row. On the top row here, and this would be the same for the bottom row, I can not only sew this together to do that, but then I can also sew this part up here. And then to this block, I can sew these units and so forth. And then when I sew this together, I'll be sewing one rather large row, but I think it will be easier than sewing the top border as a row and then having to fiddle to make it fit. Make sense? I'm going to start sewing and you'll see what I mean. I have sewn like 12.5 inch groups together. I think you can see how they are in bits across that top border. I have not sewn that corner 9 patch together yet. That is coming. And then down the side, I also have the series of 12.5 inch pieces so that I can sew them together onto the row. All right, I have gone ahead and sewn the side part of the border to that first block and also the corner of the top border and the first part of the top border. So that is one large block. And then I've sewn the pieces to each of their blocks below, including the very large block at the end. And I'm going to sew all that together to be the first row plus borders. And I've just started to sew the second row. I've only sewn the border part, the left border, to that first block of the second row. And then I will be continuing all the way across. I don't have the border piece in there yet, but I will. And of course, I'll do the same to the third, fourth, and fifth row. Quick update. I now have sewn the blocks together for the first mega row, which is the first row of main blocks plus the border. And then I also have the second and third row. And I technically have the last 2 rows, which I have sewn together. So it is in progress. Next up, the whole quilt top all sewn. And here is the almost finished quilt. It is quilted, but it is not bound yet. But I did take it out and photograph it so that you could see the whole thing together. So that was the Forest Lake version, and you can see behind me I have the Painted Desert version, but you'll have to wait till next week to see how I arranged this quilt. Totally different, and let's just say the border isn't on the outer edges of the quilt. Until next time, my friends, thanks for watching, and why not check out this?